Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Palo Alto City Hall and to the Peter and Liz show tonight. I'm Liz Niss. I'm Vice Mayor in Palo Alto, but a former mayor, along with former Mayor Peter Druckmeyer as well. Peter was mayor in 2009 and left at the end of that year and is here with me tonight, and we're going to co-host what we hope will be a terrific hour and a half. We'll be going off the air at 11, and we'll be interviewing any number of candidates who have been on the ballot, and we'll check to see, did they win or did they lose? So Peter, let me turn to you. You were the mayor the last time you sat here, and what's been happening since then?
Well, the year I was mayor, I also had a child who's now in kindergarten. So Aiden is 5 years old, and we have a wonderful little family. I miss being on the city council, but I love being a father. So
You can come back.
that's what they tell me, but
Yes.
it seems kind of challenging these
Right.
days.
So what changes do you notice since you have left? Because it's now been 5 years, and we now have, in fact, our new system of electing people to city council, which is in even years rather than odd years. And as would have been predicted, it's a far higher turnout in even years, but this year it's a bit of a slouch. Talk about it.
Well, I'm not sure why we're not getting a better turnout this year, because I think it's a very interesting election in Palo Alto. We have 3 measures on the ballot. We have outstanding candidates for city council. We've got a really tough Palo Alto school board race. So I'm surprised that the turnout so far hasn't been higher. I'm guessing that not as many people voted in advance, voted by mail as normal, because there were some really challenging issues at the local level. And I know a lot of people turned in their ballots today, even if they had mail-in ballot. So maybe we'll see the numbers bump up, but from what we've seen so far, it looks like it's going to be a little bit of a light turnout. I would say one big difference is when I was on the council, and especially when I was mayor, we were in the middle of the recession, and we didn't have as much money to play with, which was problematic. We had to cut back on some programs, and in general, there were tough times. But now, with all this money flowing through Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, these issues of development and parking problems have really risen to the fore and seem to have shaped a lot of these issues that we're going to be talking about tonight.
So there's always the result of success. We worried in 2009, 2008, 9, 10 about where the money would be coming from in this particular era. And I think we've all been startled at what seems to be another boom in the valley. But I don't think anyone would disagree. There will also be another bust, because that's how it does seem to go. This is a cyclic kind of thing. So, and we probably will see a cycle in our council members, and we're certainly going to see a cycle in the national race. You mentioned that earlier and said you wanted to say a word or two about the national race.
Well, we're seeing big changes at the national level. The Republicans have taken the Senate, and in California, it's still a very strong Democratic state. It's interesting that it was under your leadership that the City Council did change election dates to the general election, so we were expecting higher turnout. But nationally, I think things are going to be very different in the next couple of years. I think there's going to be more gridlock, and I think it's going to make the Palo Alto City Council look very good in comparison to Washington, D.C.
So also, we'll be discussing this later tonight. There were some very big measures that were on the Palo Alto ballot for tonight, including one that will shrink the size of the council. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but that's going to be very interesting. If the council goes from 9 to 7, which looks like a possibility, how will that change the future? So that's also going to be interesting. I am going to guess some of the reason for the turnout this year is this was not a very exciting governor's race. As it turned out, he's already been sworn in, I understand, or continuing. He'll be continuing without being sworn in.
Yeah, I read that 40% of the people polled didn't even know that Jerry Brown was running for governor, and 20% knew who his opponent was. So certainly at the state level, I think there aren't a lot of big surprises.
Yeah. Kind of discouraging, I think. It's such a privilege to vote, and I know that any room full of people I walk into and say, "Did you vote?" they will all tell me they did. So you always wonder who didn't. It's always interesting.
Well, you have the sticker.
I've got
I
a
voted by
sticker.
mail, so I didn't
I
get one.
actually did, and some kind soul gave me hers so that I could wear it tonight, which
Right.
was very, very thoughtful. So Peter and I guarantee you both voted. And some of the stories this year were interesting about who hasn't voted. That's always a high point or a low point in a race when someone says, you know, who did vote, who didn't vote, an indication of your commitment. And we did see some of that this year. So I'm going to presume you vote in every race. I vote in every race. But as it turns out, there are those who, for whatever reason, choose not to. So in Palo Alto, as you probably know, about 85% of the voters now are vote by mail. And you could have dropped yours off at City Hall, you could have mailed it in, but I think what's going to be interesting is to see how many more votes will be cast and how many more we'll see tonight. So far, we'll be discussing this, but it's looking fairly definitive at this point. But that's what we'll keep doing this evening, is updating you out there on what's happening.
So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back to talk about the 3 measures in Palo Alto. Good evening and welcome back. I'm Peter Dreckmeyer, and with me is Liz Nist, and we are the co-hosts for tonight's election results here in Palo Alto. And we're going to start with the 3 measures on the ballot: Measure B, which is the hotel tax; Measure C, the utility users tax; and Measure D, which would shrink the city council from 9 members to 7 members. And with us, we have Greg Scharf, city council member; Roger Smith, council member Larry Klein; Mark Hinkle from the Taxpayers Association, and I believe council member Greg Schmidt will be joining us as well. So welcome to our guests. And why don't we start off with Measure B?
Good.
That would be
Why
you,
don't we?
council member Klein. This is, could you give a quick synopsis on what Measure B would do? And it looks like it's doing well so far. We only have the early returns, but Measure B is up with 76% of the vote.
Yes. Measure B would increase the transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax, by 2 points, from 12% to 14%. That's a tax on every room that's rented in our Palo Alto's hotels and motels. That's a significant source of revenue. The idea here, though, in which we've promised the voters, that 2% increase would be used to back up certificates of participation, which is a form of municipal financing to fund about $25 to $30 million of infrastructure improvements. And this is sort of the last piece of the puzzle of a very ambitious program which we embarked on some 4 years ago to really create enough funds to fix Palo Alto's infrastructure, particularly police and fire buildings, complete Bixby Park and our Baylands, to provide funds for parking garage in University Avenue and California Avenue areas, and to provide a very extensive bike program.
Well, and it looks like it's going to pass. It's got 76% of the vote with 5,857 votes. So your prediction, are we going to have that state-of-the-art public safety building in the next few years?
In the next, how many years?
I said few. Give it a little bit of...
Few. I thought that, I wasn't sure. Yes, I know you've toured our present public safety building, which was obsolete 40 years ago and is even more obsolete today. So I think it's an imperative that the city have a up-to-date, earthquake-safe public safety building.
One of the things we talked about before you all got up here was because we don't have anyone to speak against this measure, we thought maybe, Larry, you'd like to speak against the measure as well as for it.
I'd be happy to speak against it.
Well, Liz,
It's Measure B, not C.
Yeah, I know. I actually wrote it.
Okay, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
My name's Mark Hinkle, and I'm president of the Silicon Valley Taxpayers Association, and I actually did submit an argument to the city clerk, but fortunately, the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Association, their argument was chosen. Frankly, I thought it was a superior argument. But what we have here essentially is taxation without representation. Measure B is going to tax visitors to Palo Alto, people who do not live here, and by and large are not going to reap the benefits from this tax. So we oppose this because it's a tax increase, and frankly it makes Palo Alto less competitive than surrounding cities. When business travelers are going to come to Silicon Valley, they're going to look at what sort of TOT tax is charged, and competitive forces will come to bear, and they will go to the places where it's least expensive. And Palo Alto won't be that place. And a lot of local businesses, a lot of local restaurants and hotels are going to lose money because of that. So if it does pass, my condolences to visitors to Palo Alto, but you're going to have to pay the freight.
Thanks, Mark. And as always, for those of you who are watching and listening, there will be two sides to every one of these measures tonight. And that's our goal, is to bring that to you. So let me turn to Councilmember Greg Scharf, former mayor, who was the yes on Measure C. And perhaps, Greg, you could say a few words about what Measure C was, what its background is, and how you happen to be the person who's here supporting it tonight.
So Measure C, what it does is it modernizes the utility users tax, which was passed a long time ago when Larry was on the council years ago. So it's a modernization of the utility users tax, and what it also does is it takes 9 large users and makes them pay their fair share, what everyone else pays, and it slightly lowers the tax for everybody. It's really cleanup legislation. It's, it modernizes it. It was passed way before we had roughly the internet. I think that's correct.
Yes.
And so it was really important. It was really important that we get this done, and I really appreciate that the citizens of Palo Alto, voted for it.
Well, it's looking like it's going to pass. 85% of the vote, over 6,400 voting yes on Measure C. So this one, really not a lot of controversy once it came to the polls. Mark Hinkle, you wrote the argument against Measure C. Do you want to say what your argument was?
Well, I noted in my argument that there was a excise tax passed by the federal government to fund the Spanish-American War, and that was finally gotten rid of in 2006. Just because technology changes doesn't mean that the tax should be shifted from one set of users to another. Again, this is a ploy basically to shift the tax burden from individuals to corporations, But I will point out that businesses, if they are profitable, have to pass all costs of doing business on to the consumers. So this is just a hidden tax on consumers, both here in Palo Alto and, of course, around the world. When corporations here do business around the world, those people are going to pay that tax. And unfortunately, we think 2%, which as I understand is what the tax is going to raise, that could be easily saved by cost efficiency, putting services out to contract, competitive bid situations, and I don't think anybody, certainly people in the city council, I would argue that there's at least 2% waste in city government, and if you can't find 2%, then you're not really doing your job.
So if we go on to the next one, thanks so much, Mark, for being here for two measures, not just for one. But
Could I respond to that?
pardon?
Could I respond briefly to that?
Oh, sure.
So it's revenue neutral. It's not raising any money. It's just modernizing it. And it's actually creating a flat tax, which everyone would pay the same, as opposed to giving corporations less of a tax rate. I'm surprised the Taxpayers Association wouldn't support that. I mean, that actually seems right up where you would support it.
Well, as I said earlier, businesses don't pay taxes. They just collect it from their customers and pass it on to the government. So it's just a hidden tax on consumers.
So I'm going to jump in there, and I appreciate the back and forth. That makes it more fun to do this tonight. So we've talked about Measure B, and we've talked about Measure C, both of which I imagine a year or two from now, many of you will have forgotten. But Measure D, you're going to remember. This was first introduced by 2 or 3 of us on the City Council almost a year ago. And as things do, it lingered for some time. And then finally came up, and with a real push from one of our citizens, from Roger Smith, it went on the ballot. And this is the measure that is going to reduce the council for the first time since, I think, the 60s, from 9 to 7 if it does pass. It's looking pretty promising at this point. And so let me turn to Roger Smith, who was absolutely a one-man band on this, and was determined for his own reasons to have this pass. But I also was one of the ones who supported it and put it on the ballot.
Well, first of all, I think the City Council showed a lot of courage in putting it on the ballot, because the late Gary Fassino, this was something he worked very hard and talked about a lot. And I think it goes way back to Joe Simitian and a number of different council people. But I don't think it ever got the momentum to be on the City Council. So the colleague memo a year ago or so, it was something, and it was a close, it was a 5-4 decision to put it on the ballot. And so I think people showed courage. I think Mark Berman sort of summed it up, says Palo Alto's special, but we're not sure we're that special that we need 9. And so one of the things that drove me to work on this was, I don't think it's reducing the council, it's right-sizing the council. And I'm a businessman, I was the founder of Silicon Valley Bank. We always compared to other institutions we were competing with. And so we are way out of whack compared to the other cities. So it's a right-sizing effort, and with 7, we'll still have the most representation per person, because we're the smallest city of our competing cities. So I'm hoping it'll pass. It'll save time, money, and energy, and hopefully the new council, or the new councils, it goes into effect in 4 years, will get to be home maybe 11 o'clock, maybe 11:30, rather than 2 in the morning.
So one of the things, because I know that Greg Schmidt is going to respond to that, but several people have asked us how this will happen. It will not take place until 2018, and at that point, the shift will take place. So for those of you who think that it may happen this year, it's not happening in 2016, it will happen in 2018. But Councilmember Schmidt is here and has a different viewpoint. I'll turn off a couple of them, that'll make it better.
Yeah, thank you. I think You brought up an interesting point about how we go from this election to the next election. Tonight, they're electing 5 new council members, and 4 years from now, they'll elect 3. That means that the chance for someone who is not an incumbent will be very, very difficult in that race. So we are reducing choice. And I think that's the critical issue, is it might lead to more efficient council meetings, but not necessarily have the diversity that the current council has. It's interesting that of the people on the dais tonight, 2 of us came in as the last one in our first election and might not be have spent the last 6 years on the council without that. So I think, it does raise an issue of we are reducing choice, diversity, increasing a little bit the power of incumbency. And I guess the bottom line, though, is if you're in favor of democracy rather than efficiency, which was my original position, the people have spoken, and it's pretty clear where the citizens are on this. So congratulations.
Well, Greg, I think there are really strong arguments on both sides of this issue, and it was much closer than B or C, and it's not over yet, but with 7,500 votes cast, it's got 56%. But I think you brought up one of the stronger arguments to think about who wouldn't have served on the city council had we only had 7. People like Ellen Fletcher, who was such a pioneer in bicycle routes and safety. I think that, are there other people like that who come to mind that wouldn't have served had there only been 7 at the time? Can you think of any?
Oh, you can go down the list, but I think what it does, you've captured, is it reduces the diversity a little bit. That opportunity for a voter to say, gee, here are my favorites. I'll take a chance. I'll reach out. I'll get someone new and different in that last option. And that disappears. And we lose something.
Well, so far tonight, it looks like 2 incumbents are on their way to re-election and possibly 3 newcomers to the city council. So assuming Measure D does pass, in 4 years, if those 3 all run for those seats, it might be difficult for a newcomer to.
Yeah, it discourages people from saying, gee, it's an opportunity for me.
But as I think back on this, and as with many of us who served with Gary Fazzino, it's one of those nights that I'm sorry Gary isn't here, because Gary could have rolled off the top of his head exactly how many were on the council. And if I am correct, maybe Larry can help me with this, I think there were once 21, 2 or 3, something like that. And the number kept going down through the years. I think it went to 15, it may have gone to 11, and then I think ended up at 9. And I imagine the arguments were the same then. Although I understand that there were some very lively meetings in the 1960s. I was not around for those, but I think they would have been fascinating. But I know that this is one of those that will be argued back and forth for some length of time. And you're right, Greg, it will be interesting to see in 2018 what does happen with incumbents. Although one of the observations I made when we were deciding whether or not we would do this, is how long do most people serve? How long do you think most people serve, Peter? What would you guess?
I would guess an average of 6 years.
Dead right. It's about 6 years and 2 months. And as we went back, we found a great number of people who've only served 1 term for a whole variety of reasons. Yawa Ya is one. Sid Espinoza is another. Hillary Freeman is another. And I think, how long did you serve, Peter?
4 years.
1 term, right?
So I was 2 under the average.
Right. So I think that for many people who think this looks like a terrific way to spend your Monday nights, many Tuesday nights, some Wednesday nights, even an occasional Thursday night, they decide this really isn't their cup of tea or coffee or whatever it may be. But I think they say, this really looked great from the outside, but by the time I'm here at 11 or 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night and we're still arguing over the same agenda item we began at 10, you think, really? I don't know. So I don't know why those who have left have decided to, but I think everyone has a very different reason. And it's unusual to find people that will serve more than 2 terms. In fact, what I came up with is a very short list.
Yeah, if I could just throw in a concept of one of the striking things about my being on the council is the outstanding number of people who apply for commissions and boards who want to give their time to the community and help the government's process. And I guess you don't want to do anything to discourage that participation rate in our community.
Well, if I remember correctly, I think all 3 local papers endorsed no on Measure D. Were you surprised, Roger? Are you surprised?
I was very surprised, especially the Weekly, who I just thought for sure they would be for this. The Post did come out for it, but the other, there was only the Weekly came out against, and I don't think the Daily made a thing. But what's interesting is the folks that argued against this from a democracy standpoint made me think, I guess in Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, Redwood City, they don't have a democracy because they only have 7. The other thing, I understand that a number of commissions, we're not getting people. We have to post it again to get people to apply. And, but I really hope that the SIDS, the Peters, with 7 people where they can see they can get more done in a faster way. And I've never seen a committee of any size that 7 people can't make as good a decision as 9. And so I think it's going to save time, money, energy, and I think we're going to save thousands of dollars. And keep in mind staff time. Would you rather have 9 bosses or 7 bosses? And I have not met a person yet who wanted to have 9 bosses. Thank you.
Maybe some of our staff wish they had 2 or 3 bosses instead of the number that they do. One of the things that I was going to mention, Peter, is that we're looking at the numbers and we're seeing what the results have been so far tonight. I don't know when it's anticipated that we'll see any update, but it takes quite a while for the Registrar of Voters to get back to us in this particular county, one of the areas that always troubled me while I was sitting in a county seat. And I'm not quite sure why, but I want to reassure anyone who's watching us that as soon as we get an update, we will give you the update. It's not that we have it and we're not showing it to you, we will show it to you.
Liz, KCBS reported that the next release of votes for Santa Clara County is going to be at about 10:15.
Well, that's helpful to know. Better KCBS than KCBS. Yeah.
I do note that San Mateo posted new numbers at 9:40.
Yes.
So.
It was a constant discussion while I was at the county as to why we couldn't do this. And there were different reasons at different times. But regardless, it looks like at 10:15, for those of you out there watching us, about 10:15, we'll bring you an update if indeed KCBS is on target. So thank you. We're about to take a short break, and we'll have some other people that we'll be interviewing. And thank you for staying with us. More interviews coming and some more results very soon. welcome back, everyone. You are watching us at City Hall. This is November 4th, and while we don't have the very latest results, we have heard they're going to come at about 10:15. We have up here tonight people who have been running for the City Council, and I think perhaps the easiest is to have them introduce themselves. We are still early in the evening, but probably the results that we have seen so far will have a good, I think they're a good indicator of where we're going during the evening, Peter. So do you want to kind of corral your end, and then I'll do the same up here? I think we've each got 3 on either side of us.
Okay, so we have Greg Scharf, an incumbent, running. It looks like you're going to do quite well. You're in second place right now. You're probably relieved that the months of campaigning are coming to a close here. Do you want to, I think everyone knows who you are, but anything you want to share from the campaign?
Well, I was just going to say it was a good campaign. I enjoyed the campaign. It was great meeting new people and connecting with a lot of people in the campaign. And it was a good group, and I thought it was a great campaign, and everyone talked about the issues, and I think that was great.
And next to you is Eric Filseth, and perhaps you'll be sitting next to each other on the dais next year. It looks like Eric's in the top 4. Eric, it was an interesting campaign. I think we're still going to see a lot more ballots come in today because a lot of people hadn't made up their mind. For you, was it a clear choice of who people should vote for, or did you see some confusion out there in the community?
Well, I think, the night's pretty young, so I wouldn't be calling it at this point. I think, from my perspective, I think, I just want to thank everybody that worked on my campaign. It's been a huge effort, a lot of people involved, and I think, this is quite an experience, and, I just can't thank the people that worked on this enough. Thanks.
Well, congratulations. And next we have Karen Holman. People are familiar with Karen. She's been on the City Council for 5 years, and you've run a couple times in the past. How did this campaign differ from those?
Well, it differs from the first one because it looks like I'm winning this one.
Yeah, it looks like you're in first place right now.
That's always a real defining factor.
Those who've been around for a while know that I just missed out on the first one in 2005, and so I ran again in 2009, and this is the term I'm serving right now. So in that way it's different, but I think mostly things stay the same because people in this community are very engaged. I would say that in this particular campaign, people were more engaged, more compassionate about the issues, more willing to work for the campaigns, and there was more concentrated conversation about the issues themselves. It was more of a, I guess you could say, hard-hitting, issues-focused campaign than some of the ones in the past, and I think that's good. I think, when you're focused on issues, it's a good process, it's good for the public, it's good for public dialogue, and helps people make their decisions. So I think it was a good campaign.
You did just barely get edged out in 2005, and it looks like there's going to be a very close race for 5th between Corey Walbach and Lydia Koo. Right now they're separated by just 50 votes. Any advice for them?
So I said this not long ago at a coffee. So when I didn't quite make it in 2005, Vic Ojakian just beat Gary Fazzino out by calling me to say, here's the list of people who didn't win the first time. And the list is pretty extensive and pretty impressive of those who didn't quite make it. And most of those people, or many of those people, ran again and did make it. So I think it's a fabulous experience. I would not discourage anybody from running or running again. I think it's a great experience and a great opportunity to be involved and engaged, and possibility of serving.
Thank you.
It tests your stamina, don't you think? That's what I can remember the most. I remember many late nights and many very early mornings. So working down on the other side, not the left, but the other side, the first person is Tom Du Bois, which looks, for many, they're going to have to get used to not saying Tom Du Bois.
That's correct.
Am I right?
Yes.
So,
I think Du
Tom,
Bois, Pennsylvania.
this is your first time out. You live in Midtown, and tell us about the race. You ready to do it again?
Well, I was surprised at how all-consuming campaigning can be. Like you always feel like there's something else you could do, to knock on enough doors, that I go to enough coffees. Like you said, you lay awake at night thinking, should I do that one more thing? So that kind of surprised me. It was definitely an interesting experience, and you could spend as much time as you want on it. I was pretty proud of the campaign. I think I spent, a good amount of money and ran a good campaign. So, I feel good about it.
I think, Peter, and I'll bet you would agree that people who run a good campaign know they ran a good campaign. Whether you win or lose, you know whether or not you did a good campaign, and that's really important.
And we know you ran a good campaign.
And so, and A.C. Johnston, new to this year, jumped in at the last minute, took a chance. Tell us about it.
Well, it's been an interesting process. It's been, as I say, it's an adventure. As you say, this was my first campaign, so I had a lot to learn, and I thought it was really a fascinating process. And I enjoyed it. I was really amazed and pleased by the amount of support that I got, the number of people who came out to help walk precincts, stuff envelopes. I cannot thank the people who worked on the campaign too much. They just did a fantastic job, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished.
It's interesting. The issue of gratitude and being grateful to those who supported you, I think, is a very common one for people who have run. It's hard to repay those people who knock on doors and are, out there, on behalf of you, hoping that, you'll have that opportunity to represent them. So John Friedrich is next.
Frederick, yeah. Well, I think...
I do apologize.
That's okay.
I practiced how to say it. And
you confused me with Susie Richardson, maybe. The thing that amazed me most about this campaign is the amount of money spent. And I myself, nearly a quarter of the $600 I spent came from out of the district. So nearly $150 of the $600 I spent came from outside of Palo Alto. This is my 40th year here. My first election was in 1974. And the thing that amazed me the most is how much I've lost a step in 40 years. I'm probably not as good a candidate. I'm a better informed person, and I have a bigger toolkit, bigger skill set. But the amount of energy it takes to run for 2 or 3 months flat out is incredible. And even with training at the gym and all that. Of course, they closed the Y at Page Mill on me in the middle of the campaign, which
Do you think
took
that was
a little
conspiracy?
starch out of my sales. But other than that, a big difference between what politics was in the 70s and what it is now.
Yeah.
And a part of that I mentioned many times during the campaign is the generosity of spirit that Palo Alto used to have seems largely absent in today's community. And a couple of people said to me without being prompted, it's not just Palo Alto, it's the country and perhaps the world. So that is an issue we have to address, I think, as a community and as people that are interested in changing our ways, is that issue of generosity of spirit. So this is a good way to wrap up my political career here in Palo Alto, this campaign.
Well, I don't know. It may not be wrapped yet. It's hard to know. And Nancy Shepard, our current mayor, has just joined us. And greetings, Nancy. We've kind of run down the gamut. So everyone has talked about the race, what happened, and so forth.
And you want my take on?
No, just we've been talking about how the race was, how it went, and a number of people mentioned, thanks to those who supported them.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's been, I've had a great support team, and it's been a good, we got our message out. We did exactly what we set out to do, and so it's it's been a long experience, I have to say. It started in early August, and even before that. So I think I would agree with John that it's exhausting running a campaign and trying to keep your regular life going. But always good to, meet with the public and reconnect and, reflect back on all of the stuff that I've done on council these last 5 years, and it's been a great accomplishment. It's really a changed council from when we first got there. Sorry, Peter, I know I might have taken your spot when I got elected 5 years ago, but, it's a very nimble, staff now that can adjust to, what's getting brought into the city quickly, and I'm very proud of all that work. So it's been a good 5 years and a good campaign from our standpoint. So,
Well, thank you, Nancy, for your years of service and great job as mayor. And I know this was a really tough election. It was contentious. John Frederick mentioned he raised a whopping $600, and on the other extreme was Greg Scharf, who raised the most money, and you felt you really needed to get your message out. And something I thought was really smart on your part was to show the diversity of support, including a lot of neighborhood leaders. How do you think things are going to be on council moving forward? Is there going to be a lot of tension, or do you think the council is going to come together to address the challenging issues that we face?
Oh, I absolutely think it's going to come together. For instance, me and Eric did our endorsement interview together, and I thought we bonded strongly. I don't know how Eric felt, but I felt really close to Eric after that. And me and Karen have always been good friends. And so I'm sure I'll get to know Tom. We really had lunch or coffee once. So no, I think it's going to be a great council, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone.
So I've got a question, Peter. We're talking about what it takes to run for council. I know not all of you worked, but did anyone manage to work and run at the same time? Just jump in if you did, because it's tough to do that.
I wrote 2 legal motions. 2 of them. That's working.
And how did they
I
fare?
worked a little bit, but not as much as I intended to be working. I thought I was going to be able to work a lot more. But like I said.
I think that's one of the hardest parts, is you discover that if you really needed to work, if that was important in your life and you were the only breadwinner and that was essential, I think it would be extremely difficult to run. I know that Eric and I had coffee and we talked about he had this period of time in his life when he could run. And I know that AC and I had that same discussion. But Tom said, I think you said maybe you fit an hour or 2 in every other day.
Yeah,
Yes,
but kind of about
yeah.
half time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. And while Nancy has been on the council, she resigned from her job. So this is a very consumptive job, and one that I think not everyone is. Not everyone has that ability to be able to spend that amount of time, energy, and keep up your enthusiasm through that whole period of time. So back to you, Peter.
Well, I'm just recalling, after I got elected, I went to a conference for newly electeds, and my takeaway was that when you're running for office, you focus on the best possible thing. And once you're elected, you've got to focus on the best thing possible. And people make promises to their constituents and say what folks want to say, but sometimes it's a little bit more challenging when you're up here and you have certain rules and laws that you have to take into consideration. I'm wondering, does anyone feel they learned something through the course of the campaign that might make serving a little easier or a little bit more challenging? And what are going to be the early issues that are addressed by this new council? Anyone want to take a stab at any of those?
How about asking two new ones who look like they have a good chance of getting on, either Eric or Tom? Because it looks like either of you are new, and it looks like from this at least, like you have a good chance to be sitting up here. Either one, jump in.
I think it's definitely going to be a learning curve. I think the good thing is that we ran on specific issues. It was a very kind of issue-focused campaign. So the fact that I got elected to me is an indication that, the voters support those positions. So I'm going to continue to advocate for those positions that I ran on. And then, like Peter said, I think you'll learn as you're on council kind of what's achievable and in what time frame. I've already seen kind of the pace of the council, so I'm not expecting to get everything done in January, but maybe by February.
Okay, that's a good quote. Eric, do you want to say something about usually what they say to you is, what do you hope to accomplish in your first 100 days?
Yeah, very good. Not to drown. I think as people have mentioned before, I think this campaign was a pretty issues-oriented campaign. And I think one of the things that I sort of felt the best about was, I think as candidates with the public through the course of this, we're talking about the right stuff. I mean, these are the issues that people care about, particularly, land use and the disposition of the comprehensive plan and a few other things like that. And, I think that's going to be high priority for the council to tackle. And I think it won't be controversial because I think this is what people care about.
Peter, you mentioned going to a new council members workshop that probably was the one in Sacramento. And I remember going to that too. I'd urge people who are new when elected to do that. I found that very helpful, and I think most people have. Greg, it sounds like you went to that one as well. Yeah, it's a good chance to meet people who are from all over California as well. So,
Liz, excuse me, but I think
John.
one issue that'll come up very strongly from what I heard in this election is affordable housing, particularly very low-income affordable housing. And the fact that the needle didn't budge after the Maybell thing, and that we're dealing with the Buena Vista issue, and that 20% of the elderly in this community are at that place where they will probably need subsidized housing later in their lives, means that that's an issue that will come up during the comprehensive plan and during the talk about the housing elements. So I think it's a huge issue that's going to come up quickly rather than later.
One issue came up for me that I don't think I was aware of when I started campaigning was, people living in their cars. And especially as you campaign, you hear from people, different neighborhoods where maybe there are RVs parked there all the time. I just think it's an issue that we're going to have to address. We're going to have to figure out, where are there places in the city where people can go when they're down to that vehicle that they're living in. And again, for me, that was part of the education of running. It wasn't really something I was thinking about when I started campaigning.
And if I might, I think John's absolutely right about the challenge of affordable housing. And for me, it's not just the diversity of the community and the range of population that we have here, but it's also the diversity of our commercial climate as well. We have retailers that are struggling against increased rents and, maintaining, it's part of the council discussion last night just, about how to retain our local independent businesses and retain our diversity of retail services and retail sales to this community, and that provides those amenities to the community that we survive on here.
Well, Karen, you're really looked to as an expert on planning, and it looks like you're going to have more allies on the council, more people supporting your positions, and you're going to be in a real strong leadership role. Have you thought much about how things might unfold in the coming years, and how the comp plan might play a role in all that?
Well, I kind of shy away from being called an expert in anything because...
An expert in modesty.
Well, but I have a good amount of experience in it, but I wouldn't say expert. But, well, I think a lot of this has come out in the campaign. I mean, people are concerned about, housing, the range of housing opportunities, whether it's middle class, which I think, quite frankly, is the hardest kind of housing to provide here. I think that's absolutely the hardest to achieve. And zoning will play a big hand in that, but it's, because of our jobs housing imbalance and because of the increased property values here, it's not something that we're going to wholly be able to satisfy. Zoning is not going to accomplish that. It's going to have to be something that we accomplish and challenge in the best ways that we can as a part of a community dialogue and as part of the comprehensive plan. Maybe unit sizes can play a role in that. But, some things you just can't wave a wand or apply a zoning tool and make something happen. So you do the best you can. I look forward to this council working together, and I believe it will work together collaboratively. and we have some very capable staff that will help advise us on what we can do to move the community forward, to support our diversity, for instance. But some things we're just going to have to recognize that we're not going to be able to be perfect about. It's not a perfect process, it's not a perfect world, and we do the best we can with each other and for each other.
I remember one of the things that people used to talk about during campaigns was, when you're running, it's all about me, me, me. And all of a sudden in January, it's about we, because in order to have something pass, you really will have to get the votes to do that. And that can be sometimes as simple as, just you get a unanimous vote, and other times you will be going at it for some long period of time and frustrated with the outcome. So I think I would agree. I think this group will come together cohesively, but probably we will all be learning from and with each other over those first few months. I can remember one of the first things I had to do was learn how the buttons worked. And I remember sitting down and thinking, okay, what's the silver one for? And then what are the other ones? And then I think we've got a panic button right here if we need it, Peter.
I think that's the eject button when speakers get out of line.
Right. If somebody does that. So, AC, I'm interested because you were out there for the first time, and as they would say, how did it feel?
Well, I don't know how any of the buttons work, so that, well, as I've said earlier, it's been a learning process, very kind of a steep learning curve in terms of the whole campaign process. But I've obviously learned a lot about the issues that we've talked about in the campaign, which I think are important issues and things that I'm sure the council will be focused on in the coming year. I think the election, the campaign process is an important one because it does, first of all, get the candidates out talking about the issues and allow the citizens to really listen and decide what they want. And then it'll be the council's job to execute on that.
AC, one thing I noticed about you is you really seem to enjoy campaigning. Are you going to give it a shot again in 2 years?
I'm not going to make any commitments at this point, but I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed the process of getting out, and I think I was a little surprised myself at how much I enjoyed walking precincts and knocking on doors and meeting people and talking to people. I thought that was really a lot of fun.
Any other surprises on the campaign trail?
Well, yes. As I said at the beginning, the people that I didn't know who volunteered to work on the campaign and who came out weekend after weekend to walk precincts and help with things. I mean, I just thought it was amazing that these people would devote so much time. And they weren't people that I knew at all at the beginning of the process, but have now become good friends.
And John, you ran a somewhat non-traditional campaign. You mentioned not raising a lot of money, and I don't think you were accepting endorsements.
I didn't seek them out. I was happy to see you endorse me, kind of a back channel endorsement, sort of a back channel diplomacy is what I practice. But I don't like to accentuate the herd instinct that I think endorsements tend to provoke. So, but I did have a comment about the reduction in the council. I was on the side of Tom and some of the others that thought that does promote representation and democracy and so on. And I wondered if Roger Smith and the proponents of this are going to move on to the Supreme Court, where there's 9 people that seem to be bloviating quite a bit, and perhaps in the interests of efficiency, we can reduce the Supreme Court to 7.
They may represent a few more people,
is that the next hill
than we
to
do.
climb?
That might be challenging with the Republicans now controlling both houses.
Could be.
And
Even
especially
getting the
if
nominee
the
through.
president were the one to choose the two who would have to leave. I don't know if they'd go for that.
So I'm looking down toward Nancy because it's always difficult when you're the mayor and difficult when you're running the city as the mayor at the same time. So talk about some of those challenges that you had running and serving and all being mayor at the same time. That's a big order.
Yes, I think that it puts you in a position of, being front and center a lot on the city issues. Just today, working and struggling through some of the community concerns over last night's tragedy was something that was really important for me to set everything aside to do. And it reminds me of, why I wanted to get involved and how I've stayed involved throughout the decades in Palo Alto to make sure that we have, that depth and breadth of quality of life, that isn't just measured by how we look at, the issues of zoning. And it's one of the elements of Palo Alto that really makes us so unique. Running while I'm mayor has been a rigor because there's been a lot of elements, just on dais that have changed during the campaign to either allow people to, I've given people more time to talk so that we can try to stay collegial throughout the evening on some tough topics instead of where during the beginning of the year, we were kind of asking people to take 5 minutes or 8 minutes or something like that. So it has been a bit of a challenge going back and forth. And but always a privilege and a great community to work for. So
I've often thought, though, it's hard to be mayor for a year. And you barely get started and it's June, and suddenly you look up and it's October, and then you're done. And so you've got to get that agenda, get it done, and be on with it, because it moves very quickly.
Should we get Roger on that one too?
But, yes. Well, there are cities that do elect their mayor. Hearkening back to Gary Fazzino again, Gary always wanted to have an elected mayor. Some of our cities do, as you know. Sort of some random cities do. Gilroy does with 35,000 people. And so does Morgan Hill with, I think, 30,000 people. It's interesting. It simply is how cities see themselves, how they see themselves being governed, and what they see is what they want certain outcomes to be. So here, even though the mayor has a lot to do with what happens in the agenda, there's also that just 1 year opportunity to do what you can with that.
Liz, do you think with the relative ease that this change from 9 to 7 seems to be accomplished, that there'll be other charter changes now? Initiatives from the people to elect a direct election of mayor, or district elections, or one that I propose is a 2-year term of office for city council people, something like that. Any charter change like that appears to be much more easily achieved than it did before this Measure D, I would say.
I don't know. The only charter change I can think of recently is the one where we went from voting in odd years to even years. So we haven't made a lot of charter changes.
Well, this is a big change.
This is a big change,
And I remember
right.
when we moved from June to fall elections, and then when we had the spring elections, we did the budget process while the election was going on, and that really led to some interesting conversations.
I think maybe we could elect you the new Gary Fazzino. We need somebody with that kind of memory. Yeah. Well, really, we tend to not remember exactly how things transpire. And it's important, recalling that the past is a good predictor of the future. I think that's always very helpful. I'm looking up, and I'm knowing we're getting to the end of this segment, Peter, so I'll let you pick up on some of the others from your end. Maybe you could have another discussion about what it actually costs to run for this office, because I think this has been a benchmark year. Usually what I have seen in the past is pretty much equal spending, not too much on one side or the other. Now, right up here, sitting here tonight, we have John. And John, you hit 600?
$600, yes.
Yeah, made six, right.
I still have stamps that I haven't used, so.
And at the other end, we have Greg. So Greg, say a little more about that, because I think there'll be a lot more written up about this race. And I think, as Peter said, you felt it was important to get your message out. There were 12 candidates. That's a big field. One dropped out, but at the very end. A very challenging year.
Well,
One of the most challenging we've seen in quite some time.
Unlike a lot of races, this was a very issue-oriented campaign. And there were a lot of challenges to what the City Council had done over the last 5 years. And I thought it was really important to get out the positive message about all the good things we'd done as a City Council. And I was very proud of my record and of the record of our City Council. And I thought that was something that was really important to get to the voters. And unfortunately, now that we've gone to even year elections, I mean, I supported that because we have more people participate in voting, but that does make the direct mail much more expensive. So if you want to get your message out in an even year election, it costs a lot more money. And I think that's where that spending comes from. At least that's where I spent the money.
We're expecting to get updated election returns at 10:15, but we still haven't received those. But as of the early returns, we have Karen Holman in first place, Greg Scharf in second place, Tom Du Bois in third place, and Eric Filsath in fourth place. And then there's a really tight race for fifth. That's Corey Walbach and Lydia Koo, about 50 votes apart. But Eric and Karen and Tom, I think you all spent around the same amount of money, mid-20s. Is that correct?
22.
And was that, did that feel sufficient? And do you think Palo Alto might benefit from some kind of cap on
Since
fundraising?
they seem to have succeeded with that, it sounds like just by observation, that would have been a sufficient amount.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, I think in this community, it's population 65,000. I think in a community this size, I think a grassroots campaign is quite sufficient. I spent about $24,000. I also have some stamps left over, so we haven't tallied for those yet. But I think it's quite sufficient. And I think the grassroots campaign where the citizenry is involved deeply and heavily in the campaigns is a quite sufficient and efficient way to run a campaign for City Council in this community. And would like very much to see it stay that way.
So I'm not going to call it a slate. We'll call it a group. But if you're running as a group and therefore you can consolidate, one of you be the spokespersons for that. Do you think that helped? Because when you can put out things and you're sharing the cost.
I don't think we shared a lot of cost. I think, again, we each raised 20s. We all did our own mailers, our own lawn signs, all those expenses. For me, I think it's what Karen was going is, I had a pretty good campaign team and a lot of grassroots effort that kind of substituted for money. And for me personally, I used a lot of email and technology. I didn't do as much physical mail, which cost more.
So social media makes a difference?
Yeah, we also did Facebook ads. They're quite efficient, don't cost that much money. So yeah, I agree with Tom too. I think it is some concerted effort, but pretty much traditionally campaigns do joint drops. There's a lot of savings in that too, and just in terms of human effort and getting the word out. That's very common, very standard, and very traditional.
In fact, something we always used to do, was team up together. So with that, I can tell that we're coming up on another break. We're absolutely delighted you're all here looking down the row with Nancy, John, AC, Tom, and down on this end with Karen, Eric, and Greg. And thank you very much for coming down. I know you've all got parties and events that you should be going to, and people anticipate your being there. So I know this audience and those who are at home watching are really delighted that you are willing to spend that time. So thank you so much for coming down. And you can be excused. You can go back to having a good time.
And thank you for your leadership.
We'll hope that we can bring you some new figures, and apologies for our county. that can't seem to quite get their act together fast enough. Everyone, we are so pleased that you're hanging in there with us because we know without having results, you must wonder whether we're just kind of dangling you on the hook. We have no results. I wish I could say that we could bring you an update, but we're pretty much where we have been now since 8 o'clock tonight, about 8:01. So we're so pleased that you're with us, and we have school board candidates, and we have some who look like they're winning, and has another very tight race, just as City Council does. So these are the cliffhangers that are here tonight. So we have 4 of the 5 candidates for the school board who are here. And Peter, why don't you introduce them, and then we'll give them a chance to talk about how their race went and what successes they've had and what big challenges there are for the school district.
Okay, well, thank you, Liz. And with us tonight are Gina Dalma and Catherine Crystal Foster, Ken Dauber, and Che Cabrera. So welcome to all of you. And I'll tell you what I was thinking earlier today is that we have Measure D on the ballot. It looks like it's going to pass and shrink the city council from 9 to 7. And what if we boosted the school board from 5 to 7? And I'm thinking this would be the year because we have such great candidates. And while I was on council at one point, we had so many candidates for the Palo Alto Utilities Commission that we actually did increase it from 5 to 7 so we can get those people on. So a lot of responsibility with the school board. It's not just the city of Palo Alto, it's also Stanford, parts of Los Altos Hills. So a big undertaking. And Ken, why don't we start with you? You are the leader so far. These are the early returns, people who voted before today. And you have 4,146 votes. And I'm sure there are more that we'll be tallying up soon. But you're the top vote getter. Are you surprised?
I had no idea, really, how this was going to go. So in that sense, yes, I'm surprised. I didn't have any expectations. I thought that it was a race that had a lot of discussion of issues, a lot, as you pointed out, of strong candidates, lots of different factors. I really had no clear sense about how this was going to turn out.
Could I interrupt right at this one? Because one of the questions Peter asked before was, did it help if you had run previously and lost? Because we could look back and see that there are candidates in both school board and city council side who've run, and then they've run again when they didn't make it the first time, and they've had great luck the second time. Did the first time, was that kind of a good practice? Was it a good, good anticipatory of what would come during this particular race? It was just 2 years ago.
That's right. I mean, it's not as effective as winning the first time, I suppose.
That's the truth. Far easier to start that way, right?
Yes, I think that having some experience about just how things work, I think we ran a much better campaign this time than the first time. We had a bunch of yard signs left over. I wisely didn't put any dates on the first ones.
Good idea.
2 years ago. So yeah, I think it's the case, and I think that one thing I've done in this campaign is a lot of door-to-door canvassing, and I think that the voters in the community, people in the community, are more familiar with me, having seen me 2 years ago and seen me, over the intervening time as well, and I think that produces a degree of familiarity and comfort that wouldn't otherwise be there.
I think that's true.
Catherine, why don't we go over to you? You mentioned that your parents on the East Coast are watching the results and they're waiting anxiously. And you right now are almost tied for second. It looks very, very close between you and Terry Godfrey, maybe 70 votes. How are you feeling?
Well, like Ken, it's hard to know what's going to happen in a race like this. I knew from the start that we were going to have a very close race because there's some excellent people who are running for school board. Of course, would like to win, know that with very few precincts reporting right now, it's very hard to know where it's going to go. So I'm eager, along with my parents, to find out what's going to happen next.
Well, I think you ran a great campaign, and I think I saw more of your signs, a lot of Ken's signs too, but more so, and Gina had quite a few, and probably more so than city council members. So congratulations to all of you. And Gina, this is your first time running. We hope you'll come back and give it a try again. Right now, it looks like you're in 4th place. Of course, anything could change.
I do have to say that I told my children that I'm winning 4th place.
All right, all right. Almost bronze. Yes, yes. So what did you learn during this campaign? What did you learn about the city, about yourself, about Palo Altans?
So first of all, I mean, to me, it was a total privilege to run, right? I grew up in a country where you just don't put your hat in the ring and suddenly you're running for public office. That just doesn't happen. So first, I was amazed by the process. I learned so much. I learned so much about our community. I learned so much about myself. You know, you put an idea out there and suddenly people come around you and that idea happens. And that's a gift that I will keep forever.
So do you think, and I think Peter asked you this as well, does it motivate you to want to come and try again? As we just talked about with Ken, and I'm thinking back of many people that I've known through the years who have not quite made it and yet have come back and often finish first the next time they're out. So there are obviously lots of lessons to be learned, but also great value in the public becoming familiar with who you are and what your name is. Not going to declare tonight, right?
Not tonight.
Right. Let's go down to Jay, who,
Jay,
you were the dark horse, right?
Yes, I certainly was running an alternative campaign, bringing new ideas as an alumni from Gunn in the Palo Alto Unified School District. Yeah, I just was following up for some of the questions that were asked earlier. I feel some of the most wonderful things about the campaign were that, you know, first of all, that all of the candidates were amazingly qualified, and whoever does win is just going to be a great support for the actual school board. So we're really excited about that. I personally ran, more of a small campaign. Run no money, really just grassroots on that level, and everything fit into place. I felt like my goal of being, a valid choice, but not necessarily people's first choice, was fully successful. That people really felt that my ideas were good, that I brought them up well, and my hope is to help support that in the future, that people will take some of the ideas and go with them.
Why don't we, Peter, go, let's try this one, because almost invariably, if you're running for office, somebody says, what would you like to see changed? What do you think is important to tackle first? So if you're going to look at the issues, looking down at this end, as they usually ask you, in your first 100 days, what would you like to change? Why don't we start with Catherine? Because let me mention, school board candidates will be sworn in within the month. So you begin this, I remember this well. I took office in early December, and we made the Tinsley decision at my first meeting. That was really baptism by fire. So sometimes there are really stunning things that happen in your first month or two in office.
And I can see how that would be. Right now, our school district is, in a sense, in some ways of collective mourning, because we have had a very tragic and unexpected event that happened last night. And I believe that certainly within the first 100 days of the new school board sitting, we're all going to need to cope with that. I do want to take this opportunity to extend my sincere sympathies to the family and the friends of the poor, of this child who we lost. And I think that among some of the things that I would be doing as I start off is making sure that we as a district, as a whole community, come together in a positive way, provide all the support that we can for our students, that we support this family, and that we figure out how as a community we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. So in terms of some of the actions that I think are really important, we need to listen to our students, and we need to figure out how to understand all of the issues and the pains that they may be coping with, and how we can best support them.
And Peter, I know you and I would send that same sympathy out to the family. An incredible heartbreak, an incredible challenge, I think, for the school district as well. While we're at that end, Gina, if you were, suddenly you discover now you're in second place and you could be on the school board, what would you like to see happen first or second or third?
So, through the campaign, we all heard the huge challenge that our district has in terms of consistency. So, first and foremost, I would make sure that I am looking at specific policies that have affected our kids' social and emotional well-being, specifically something like homework policy, that we know we have a great one, but the first thing that I would do is make sure that we are implementing these methods to evaluate the policy that we already have, to make sure that we are implementing consistently, making sure that we're getting the feedback from students, parents, teachers, et cetera, to see how it's being implemented, right? And then establish these information loops in terms of making sure that the policies that we have that are affecting our kids' social and emotional well-being are being implemented. So really just taking a step back and making sure that the things that we say we're going to do, we're doing them consistently throughout our school district.
Gina, I think whether you win or lose, you definitely have done a wonderful job of bringing the issue of student well-being to the forefront, and thank you for doing that. When I was on council, we had a string of suicides. It was one of the hardest things we had to address, and now it looks like we're in a similar situation. So well-being is so important. Thank you.
So we look down, and for you, Ken, it looks like this may not just be an exercise, but a reality that in a month you may be sitting there, and then in that month you may get your first packet, and you're going to be making your first decisions. Tell us what would you like to tackle?
Well, I agree with Catherine and Gina about the importance of supporting the students and faculty and staff at Gunn as they work through this tragedy. And I think that we need to really recommit ourselves to the work of understanding and addressing the social and emotional needs of our students. And that's work that have been deeply engaged in for a period of years. And I think it's important that we do that. And I also think that doing that is really fundamental to putting students first in terms of learning and achievement and health. And so those are the issues that I would look to first. I expect that none of this will be controversial. I expect that the school board, however constituted, is going to see these as priorities and is going to be pursuing these.
No, I think so. Jay, would you concur?
Yes, absolutely. It's just such a difficult situation to deal with, and the severity of the problems of how you work with students to allow them to grow and prosper in a safe and emotionally secure way is something that we really need to get our entire community behind, because there's no way that just 5 people on the school board are going to be able to fix that. It's really not just a school issue, it's a full societal issue, and the pressure that our society puts on our children to achieve to such a high level, and then having all of the emotional issues of being so young, and it's just a very, very difficult time in a person's life, that a direction that our society is going faster and faster and busier and busier. So we have to hope for the best.
I noticed none of you took up the idea of adding 2 more people and bringing it up to 7. Anybody want to make a quick comment? I know we're coming to the end of this segment. What do you think? You want a couple more? Would that be an asset?
2 more board members and 1 more school?
Or there's the full term limits, and we just put all 5 of us on there and switch it all out. But people did comment on that a few times.
I suppose it would give those 2 city council members somewhere to go. Peter, is that the?
So I want to thank you all so much. I think that we're joshing a bit about 7, but it's always a thought. But we really appreciate your coming, all of you. It's terrific. Ken, it looks like you are going to be sitting there, so congratulations. And looking down at the other end, looks tight for you, Catherine, so we'll be watching along with your parents. And Gina, if you don't make it on this try, I hope you'll sincerely will consider it again. I enjoyed getting to know you, and I know the community did as well. So thank you all so much. We're winding this up for now, taking a quick break, and we'll be right back to close down the show. Peter?
Okay, let's just check and see if we are going to take a quick break, or we're going to wrap it up. So we still don't have any update on the returns, and that's our county registrar of voters. That's nothing to do with
Let me add that it's embarrassing. As somebody who was at the county for quite some time, I really feel we owe an apology to the community for having 2 hours without having any further results on this race.
Well, I think we should have loaned the county our city clerk and her team.
Right.
Donna Greider, fantastic. She is leaving the city on Thursday, and we're going to miss her, but we have had seamless elections and just great interface between staff and the city council. So we're going to miss you. She's here in the audience. So just a wrap up, we only have the early returns from the mail-in ballots. Those came in a little after 8 o'clock, showing Karen Holman in first place for city council, Greg Scharf in second place, Tom Du Bois in third place, Eric Filseth in fourth place, and Corey Walbach just beating out Lydia Koo for fifth place. Now we'll see if those numbers stand when we get the next update, and the night is still young. And then for Palo Alto Unified School Board, first place Ken Dauber, second place Terry Godfrey, third place Catherine Crystal Foster, fourth Gina Dalma, and fifth Jay Cabrera.
So we might add to this that this is early. We don't know how many precincts are in yet, and we don't know how many ballots got delivered today, both absentee and others. So I would encourage you to watch the website to see when those updates do come through. You can watch it through the night. And I'm hoping at some point, I hope within the next half hour or so, we will begin to see something more definitive. It's, as we have said, are we watching something right now that appears to be changing or not? I think I am seeing some changes. And I'm not sure if we have sufficient time to go through those, Peter, or not. We are going to wrap up at this point. Thank you so much for listening to us tonight, for visiting with us. Peter Druckmeyer, former mayor, and I are absolutely delighted to have been hosting you at City Hall, Palo Alto City Hall tonight. Tune in, and thank you again for being with us.
And thank you for voting.
Aye.